I know it can seem a bit overwhelming, but trust me, Auto Layout is going to become your absolute best friend when it comes to designing in Figma. I'm going to be honest, I think it's at least doubled how fast I get through all my designs, as it just absolutely takes care of all those annoying issues of making sure that spacing is the same and consistent across your designs. And I know what you're thinking, Auto Layout is super confusing, super overwhelming. You kind of move something and everything breaks and you don't know what's happening. And don't worry, I was there when I first started as well, but that's what I'm here for. I'm going to show you how to master Auto Layout and make your design life that much easier. G'day everyone, it's me, Drew, and today I'm going to show you how to master Auto Layout. We're going to start with basic, we're going to move into the advanced, but before we jump in too deep, if you haven't already, you should like it, comment it, and subscribe it down below, because you're an absolute legend and should be nominated for Australian of the Year, and you should do that. Thanks. Actually, I'll quickly give you a reason of why to leave a comment down below. This text component, would you say this is a basic or advanced web component to use within your designs? And look, be brutally honest. If you think it's basic, it can be basic, it's fine. I'm curious about your answers at the front. And then once we get to the end, let me know if it was the same or not the same. Now, before I jump into Figma, I know there's a 50-50% chance that either I'm talking to OCD design people or more creative arts designer people. The OCD designer people, you're not a problem. I know you're probably going to do this without me saying it. But for you creative arts, designery people, you need to make sure that Figma's clean. If your Figma is an absolute mess, you're not going to be saving yourself any trouble. In order to effectively design with Auto Layout, I 110% recommend to make sure that you're naming your layers appropriately. If you've got text box 53, frame 107, group 275, you're not going to know what you're designing when you need to kind of rearrange stuff within your Auto Layout. So I very much recommend making sure and making it a common practice that you're naming your layers. Now jumping into Figma, and not to sound too dumb, but if I was to describe what Auto Layout does, is that it dynamically auto lays out your elements within a row or a column with all the spacing settings that you can configure. So essentially, the more elements you add into that auto layout, the frame dynamically changes to whatever's in that frame. Real short version is that think of it the distribute alignment tool, except it updates automatically and it's absolutely on roids. Now to start off, I have 5 beautifully colored rectangles of different heights, different widths, all with different spacing, all with nice, pretty names. Now I know there's someone out there that didn't listen to me about what, 20, 30 seconds ago. Trust me, do it. For the love of God, please do it. Now to enable Auto Layout on these components, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these in a group. So all these items are now in a group. You can also do this in a frame. It's much of a muchin. And then from there, I'm going to enable Auto Layout. And the first thing you would have noticed is now that a couple of rectangles moved across. So what it's done is now it's evenly spaced all these rectangles to be 78 pixels apart. So that's the first important setting you're going to want to know, is that this is the spacing between the elements. So hypothetically, if we change this to 50, it then moves everything in. If we make this to 100, it will space everything apart. As well, if we hover over it, you'll see this little line over here. If you click and drag it, you can also move that spacing across if you just kind of gauge it by eye. So as I mentioned before, Auto Layout can be either a row or a column. So that's what these arrows over here are for. So this will align it in a row. And if we click the vertical direction button, it will align it in a column. Now what I'm going to quickly do as well is name this so it's not frame 1, Auto Layout example 1. And I can see that within my layers. So while I'm in the layers panel, let me open up this frame, and then you'll notice that the rectangles are sorted in the same way it's sorted within the Auto Layout. So the way the Auto Layout sorts the components, it is from top to bottom or from left to right, essentially in the way it is ordered within the frame. So if I want purple to be at the top of the Auto Layout, all I have to do is I just have to click and drag that up to the top, and then that's nice and up there. If I want, let's say, saffron to be at the bottom, I can just click and drag and move that down to the bottom. It makes it super easy and just quickly rearranging your layouts. But if you want to start getting really fast with your designs, you can use the keyboard shortcuts of the square brackets open and closed to quickly move things to the top or to the bottom of the list. So if we want saffron to the top, open bracket, but then we still want red or the orange to be at the top, open bracket again. And then we want purple at the bottom, close bracket, and then we're back into that order that we want. Again, just to show you what it's like in the horizontal layout, If I move this back to horizontal, if I want saffron at the end, it goes to the bottom, which is to the right. If I want blue ribbon at the front, I go to the open square bracket, it brings to the front or at the top of the layout list. And then if we just quickly undo what we did in a not so smart way, ding, ding, but yeah. Or again, you can just kind of click and rearrange it from here. So now let's cover the alignment of the elements within the auto layout. So the first thing we're going to look at is over here. We're going to look at the width and the height, and then the settings below that. So essentially we've got hug for both. So what this will do is it will dynamically hug the elements within the auto layout frame, meaning the width will be dynamic. So if we increase this to 150, you'll notice it goes from 850 pixel width to 1050 pixel width. Similarly, if we do this to, let's say 50, it changes it to 650. Same with the height. So if we did this as a column auto layout, currently it's 750. If we change that to 75, it goes to 850. So again, hug means that the width and the height will dynamically hug the elements and the spacing defined within the auto layout. But to show you how we can realign elements within the auto layout frame, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag and just expand that frame wider. And you'll see that now it's become from that hug value to now fixed. So we can just click, type that and make it 500. And now looking down within the auto layout settings over here within this grid, you'll see by default, everything's within the top left corner. It's got a top left alignment. So essentially it's going to place the first element in the top left and then go down and make sure everything's aligned to the left. Actually, let me quickly also increase the height so you can see as well. And let's just make this 1000. So it's going to space out everything 75 pixels from the top left and just bring it all down. If let's say we make this to the top right, it just shifts everything across. So now we got elements placed on the top right. It aligns all to the right and then moves down. Again, if we do bottom right, same thing, except it lines first to the bottom and then puts everything up. We go bottom left, or even if we just say, put it in the center, it will then space everything dynamically in the center and just leave all this spacing, top, bottom, left, and right, whatever it needs to be. So the last thing I'm going to show you in terms of with the auto layout basics is essentially the padding or the inner spacing. So to show you that, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to change it from fixed width to hug content for both the height and the width. And then we're going to look at these two values down here. So the first thing is the left and right spacing, and then we also got the top and bottom spacing. So let's say if we want an inner padding or an inner spacing of the top and the bottom to be 16 pixels, or sorry, the left and the right to be 16 pixels, tap that value in here and you'll see that there's added some spacing left and right. Again, since it's a dynamic hug width, it will just automatically increase the width of the frame. If we do the top and the bottom, and let's say we do 50 pixels, it'll automatically increase the height of the frame and put that spacing within there. Again, as we could click and drag the spacing within the auto layout itself, we can also do that with the top and bottom spacing. So if we click the top, it will only move the top. If we click the bottom, it will only move the bottom. And you'll see here within the values, it's now put a comma. So if we wanted to, let's say, just put 70 or reset them back to 70 for both. But if we did want to manually manage the top, bottom, left, and right spacings individually, you could type a comma, but what you can also do is just click this button over here, independent paddings, and then you can type that in there. So let's say the left one, we wanted 24. For the top, we wanted nothing. We could do that. So now the left spacing is 24. Actually, let's make it something big like 80. We've got 80. We got the top is nothing. We got the right as 16, and then we got the bottom as 70. So now that we covered some of those basics, let's start putting them to practice. And the first example we're going to make is a desktop navigational header. So here's an example of what I may want my website's navigational menu to look like, at least on desktop. First thing I'd probably recommend for those starting is essentially just drag all your elements in, just kind of create it without any auto layout, make it all really rough. So like, for example, this space and this space and this space and this space are all different. I haven't really worried about that for now. And once we're happy with it, now we're going to apply auto layout to that layout. So since everything's in a row, same thing as we did above, I'm going to select all the components. I'm going to group them and I'm going to enable auto layout. So it's automatically said, okay, we've kind of rounded it out. Here's a spacing of 36, but actually instead I want 24. So now I have my main navigational nav automated auto layout, and instead of frame one, nav bar desktop. I'm going to rename that one. Now, while that might have seemed like something I've already showed you, one thing I wanted to demonstrate here is how to think in auto layout. So if you're getting a bit overwhelmed with any of the styling and any of the UI, strip it completely back and just think of everything in blocks. Think of everything as gray rectangles and start to create your auto layout without any of the real elements. And once you know how to build it, then go back with your proper UI elements and then start rebuilding that auto layout. At first, you might have to do this a couple of times, but slowly get used to it and you can just start essentially applying everything right into an auto layout. So now that we have a navigational bar, let's say I wanted to give a CTA a little bit of a oomph. Let's say I wanted to give put an inquire now button at the end of the nav bar. Has a bit more focus and a bit more of a highlight. So essentially what we're going to create is a button that the width will dynamically change with the text that we put within it. So what we're going to do is first, let's just make it just normal. So let's get a rectangle. I'm going to fill it. Let's say we want the button to be the yellow. I'm going to quickly grab this contact button. And you see, even when I pasted it, put it straight within that auto layout frame. So if I just drag it out, that just drags it out within the auto layout frame. And then I'm going to quickly rename it. So this is button background, not background, background. Cool. So now we're going to enable auto layout on this frame. And this is where I sometimes see things go wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group it and then I'm going to enable auto layout. So you can see that Figma, actually, if we open up our layers panel, that Figma automatically got rid of the rectangle and just made a frame with the text within it. And it's already kind of given all that padding and spacing options to it as well. What I sometimes see happen is that it doesn't put the rectangle in the background, and instead it does a text element and a rectangle element, and it kind of does it as a column. Now, there is another way to get to this point, which I kind of prefer in doing. So if we just move over here, let's call this button yellow. If now I get a text, let's call it contact. I'm going to right click. I'm going to put this in a frame. So I'm just going to say frame selection. From that, I'm going to enable auto layout. And now we're going to set out top and bottom and left and right paddings. So let's say I want a spacing of 20 pixels on the left and the right. And then I want a top and bottom space of 10 pixels. Now there's no colored background to the frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose fill, click the plus, and then let's give this one let's say a purple background. Why not? And this I'm going to rename button purple. So there's kind of two ways to get to that. Now, one of the reasons why I prefer doing auto layout the second way rather than the first way is that if I make both of these buttons say inquire today, both of the widths will automatically update. However, with this one, since I kind of built it from the ground up, whereas this one I kind of haphazardly put something together, with this one I know the spacing is what it is because I manually selected it that way. Whereas with this one, it kind of just put whatever it wanted. One thing I'd recommend though is with both of these auto layouts is that I would recommend changing the alignment from the top left to the center. So now that we have, let's say we want to put a purple button in, let's change the text to inquire today, if I can say that properly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag it from my layers panel, from the top layer into the bottom of navbar desktop. So now we're starting to nest auto layout frames within auto layout frames. And, you know, it's nice and easy to make sure we know what we're dealing with when we've got button purple and not frame 2 or 3 or anything like that. If we wanted to, we could even put the second CTA within that frame. So let's put that at the bottom here. So I want to inquire today and contact for whatever purpose. I wanted a ladder of CTAs. So now we got our nav bar designed. Let's say we wanted to design our website, at least on Figma, that the content area would be 1024 pixels, but the design we're looking for is 1440, just so we know how that overflow works within the Bootstrap. So what we can do is we can use the navbar desktop. We can change this from hug to fixed width, and let's make this 1440. So now you'll see that it's made the whole frame 1440 wide. What I'm going to do just to make things easier is make the filled background as white, just so I can kind of see what I'm dealing with. And then the top and bottom spacing, I'm just going to give it 20 pixels. Now, there's two ways in which we can make this navbar fit to a 1024. I think that's what I said before, a 1024 pixel wide content width. First thing is I can do a rectangle for 1024. I can make sure that it vertically aligns with that. And then I can just do the padding across and then just figure out how the hell or what number that actually is, or I could use math or anything like that. But this is a very annoying and not smart way to do it. As you can see, it's a weird 208 number. So that's one way you can do it. Wouldn't recommend. The way I would recommend to do it is that if we make a duplicate of this down here, first of all, I'm going to get rid of this. So there's no left and right padding. So this is navbar desktop, bad. This is going to be navbar desktop, good. Cool. Let's open up these elements. And these are all the elements within this auto layout frame. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to select all of them. I'm going to group them. I'm going to turn auto layout on. It's going to pick up the spacing as to what we already had. And then now I'm going to make this frame 1024 pixels. And instead of it being aligned to the left within our 1440 navbar, we're going to put that in the center. And then to make things a little bit easier, I'll just put a stroke on so we can see what we're dealing with. And then I'm going to call this navbar contents. So now our design width is going to be 1440 pixels wide, but the content we're actually dealing with is only 1024 pixels. So now essentially if we add another couple items in, doesn't necessarily matter. This is just not a super friendly way of doing it. If I wanted to, I could also, let's say, while my content width is 1024, if I want an extra 20 pixels padding on the left and the right, I can do that. And it doesn't disturb this alignment. Otherwise, I'd have to add 20 on this side and it wouldn't go on the other side. It would just be a bit of a mess. So again, nesting your auto layout frames is very useful. That's when things start to get a bit complicated. So I would recommend doing it too much up front. But naming your layers and nesting frames, that's the way to get to really fast designing. And that's what makes basic go to advanced. Now, before we jump into the rest of the advanced stuff, if you do have any questions, put it down there. I will reply. It might take me a day, but I'll reply, I promise. I won't leave you hanging. But yes, advanced. So auto layout, you might have noticed that there was these 3 dots over here. I wonder what they could be. So let's go up to the top. Let's duplicate this. I'm going to call it just automatically updated auto layout example 2. But instead of example 2, I'm going to call this auto layout advanced example. This one, we're going to call it auto layout basic example. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the height from hug. I'm just going to, I don't know, increase it, make the width wider as well. And then let's just make the spacing even on either side. So let's do 20 and then let's do 50. Everything aligned to the middle. Now, if we open up this menu over here, the advanced layout panel, there's 4 options within here. The first one, which we're going to cover, is pretty much the most important out of all of them, if I had to be honest. And the good thing is that it has this nice little preview GIF alongside with it, if you ever forget. So first thing is the spacing mode. So the first thing of spacing mode is that it's packed. So it will follow the spacing defined within your spacing rules outside of the advanced layout options. So everything will always be 77 pixels apart and it will be aligned in the center. But if we change it from packed to space between, and you'll see this animation automatically change, it will space everything dynamically within the frame size. This really only works if your auto layout frame is of a fixed width that is greater than what its natural width would be. So as you can see, we have all this empty space up here and down here that isn't being taken up by anything. We change it to space between, and you'll see that spacing automatically increased. And also over here, now it says auto. And the grid icon, the spacing between its elements is automatically updated as well. Again, if we put this on the left, we'll do the same, but align it to the left, do it to the right, we'll align it on the right. And now let me show you what happens when you try to change it straight into a row. The spacing is a negative. So essentially what it's doing is it's making everything fit and everything equally spaced apart, which is a negative value. So everything is overlapping with one another, which is actually a good segue to one of the other advanced layout options. So we go back into the menu and let's go to the third option, canvas stacking. So it will be the last option on top. So you can see that everything's kind of stacked as it would be naturally. The thing at the back is at the bottom. The thing at the front, or what would be on the right, is at the top. But we can inverse that. So we can do first on top, and you'll see now everything to the right is at the bottommost layer, and then everything to the left is on the topmost layer. This is really only relevant when things are negatively spaced and overlapping. Let's say if we start pulling this apart, at this point, it doesn't make a difference if it's first on top and last on top. So it's really only if your elements are overlapping that this setting is relevant. And then again, just quickly showing you the spacing mode of space between when it's in a row. Same kind of concept. We can increase the fixed width. This spacing will automatically update. We can align it to the center. We can bring it up, automatically stays to the center. We can bring it in. And everything just beautifully automatically updates, and you don't even have to think about it. In terms of the other option within the advanced layout one, so let's quickly enable a stroke on the frame. Let's say it's 10 pixels, and you'll see the width of the height didn't necessarily change, and the strokes on the inside of the frame. So now if we go into the advanced layout, we'll go strokes. So currently the strokes are excluded from the spacing of anything. If we go included in the layout, you'll see that now all the elements slowly shifted in. So it's going to calculate that 10 pixels for the border. Then it's going to give the 20 pixels for the auto layout. So I'll quickly turn that off. Just show you again. So you see it slightly shifted out. And now slightly shift back in. It would be the same as if we increase the stroke width from, let's say 20 to, let's go something absurd, 50 pixels. Everything does dynamically change. 25 goes up, but I want to get rid of it because I don't like it. So there we go, gone. So now there was one more setting within the auto layout advanced options, which was the text baseline alignment. So you'll see within here, if I hover over the tick within the preview, by default, everything will be equally aligned to the middle. But if we enable it, things will start to align to the baseline of the text. Now, what a good example would be to show you this is actually the button. So let's go down. Let's get our Inquire Today button. Let's duplicate that down here and let's call it button purple with icon. And to get our icon, let's get our very handy Google Material Symbols library. And let's say we want them to inquire, and let's say we want like a star emote or icon, sorry, not emote, icon. And let's drag that in. So by default, you'll see that since we have our auto layout frame alignment as the center, the text will be in the center of the star, which is why it's best practice to kind of just do that setting up front whenever making your buttons rather than top left. If we do top left, it looks like this and the text is floating up and it just looks a bit weird. So again, just put everything nice in the center. Or let's say your buttons are always going to be a fixed width of 260 pixels wide. Let's go fixed width 260. Your text and icon will always be in the middle with that 10 pixel spacing. But to go back to the text baseline alignment. Now, for a button, if we enable this, it might look a bit funny. Looks a bit weird. Again, this is where the context of all these settings comes in handy. So I'd say if we did this and we, I don't know, said like your starred item. This makes a bit more sense in terms of the layout of everything. Let's say, let's disable the fill background for the icon, the selection color. Let's instead change it to our yellow. So let's bring this up. This kind of makes a bit more sense. Let's just make it a white background because it's kind of like in the top corner. It's kind of like a little badge or something like that. But at least for a button, if we make this back to purple, Let's just change the selection colors all to white, or sorry, to black again rather than white. I would recommend disabling the text-based line alignment and just keeping everything nice in the center. Now for another advanced auto layout example. And let's go back to what we created before, to our navbar desktop good. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to put this button in there because I want that to be there. I'm just going to hide these two buttons and you'll see it just kind of auto rearranges the auto layout. And let's change this to inquire today. Now let's say I want to make our logo be on the left, but I want all the menu items to be aligned to the right of the frame. Now, if we hypothetically just try to increase the spacing, so again, this icon here is something new. If you click that, you can automatically change that width within that setting as well, rather than typing in a new number or from the UI having to zoom in, wait for that little bar to come up and then do it. You can just do it right within the menu as well. It's changing all the spacing within all the buttons, which we don't want. So hypothetically have to be somewhere around there, but then this is just a real icky layout. So instead, what we're going to do is if we change this back to 24. So now if we start thinking again in our nesting or frames within frames, auto layout with an auto layout mindset, if we group all our menu items together, group, let's change the name of the group to nav bar items. And let's quickly enable auto layout on this, just in the case that let's say we want to enable this yellow button again, the spacing is going to be all correct. Now, if we go within our content auto layout frame, we go within the settings and we change the spacing mode from packed to space between. We now have our items aligned on the right, all the button items, and then we have our logo on the left. Now, if I went too quick and this still looks a bit complicated, let me strip it all the way back for you by getting our colored rectangles. So let's get our basic example rectangles. I'm just going to bring this, not do the fixed width. We're going to bring this all the way down here. First of all, I'm going to make this into a row. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this orange rectangle because this essentially is going to be our logo. So let's make this logo. This frame, which we already have, we're going to disable, all the paddings, get rid of it. We're going to make all of these, let's say the width of 100 and the height of 20, just so they look a bit more like buttons, maybe 40. And let's say we want the buttons to be 24 pixels apart. And this we're going to call nav bar menu items. Menu item. And then we're just going to rename all our rectangles. And this is just me tab and shift tabbing through our layers just to quickly update and rename those layers. So now that we have that, we're just going to put these together. Let's say I want this all the way over here. I'm going to select it all. We're going to group it. From there, we're going to enable auto layout. But now this is automatically added the spacing as dynamic, but we don't want that. We want the width to be 1024. And then we want the spacing to be, instead of packed, we want it spaced between, and we want this middle space to be a dynamic. We want to push everything out. So essentially we just made the same component again, just with rectangles. Again, that's the trick of auto layout. Auto layout's all about nesting components, nesting frames. And again, if you're having trouble, think of everything as rectangles, completely take it out of it, build it that way, and then enable and start building your actual UI components. Now, the last advanced example, which I'm going to run through, which is kind of a basic web component, which you'll probably use, is a text on the left, image on the right component. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to start with our rectangles. So let's say I want our heading. Let's make our heading a little bit smaller. Then we want our body text. So we're just going to drag this down. And then we want our image on the right. From that, we want a rectangle at the back. we kind of want like a space about yay big, let's say. So let's say this is the layout which we're kind of going for. Even we can go one step further. Let's put one of our buttons at the bottom. So this is essentially the layout in which we want. So now that we kind of got that structure ready, let's make it with auto layout with actually just these components. So I'm just going to group all of this together just so it doesn't disturb the auto layout, kind of stacking anything or anything like that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to first work with this left column. So let's put all of this within an auto layout. And let's say I want my button and my body text to be 24 pixels apart. But realistically, the heading and the body text probably should be less space than the body and the button, as these components are more groups. The heading and the body text, they're pretty grouped content pieces, compared to the button, which kind of should be a little bit more isolated within the hierarchy. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the body text. We're going to also select the heading. We're going to group that. We're going to enable auto layout. And let's say we want this is 16 pixels. Let's actually want the button to have even more spacing. So I just click back out. Let's say I want this to be 36. And now the problem is I have no idea what I'm dealing with because I haven't named my frames and my layers. So let's call this left column. This is the text content. Group 3 is the button. Group 3 is the button, right? Yep, group 3 is the button. That's the text content. This is the heading. And this is the body text. From there, now that we have our image on the right, this doesn't really need to go in an auto layout frame as it's just an image. So now we're going to put these two components within its own auto layout. So that we're going to click auto layout. And now we're going to call this content auto layout. So now the spacing, let's say we actually want the spacing to be dynamic. So we want the overall elements width to be, let's actually round this out. Let's say 1024. So let's just pull this in just to make it a little bit easier to look at. And the height we want dynamic because you should, be apart from the content from the image. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give it a padding of, let's say 20 pixels. I'm pretty sure that's what we put above. 20 or it's 24. And then we're just going to make sure that all the elements are pushing apart and just make sure that space in the middle is dynamic. So spacing mode, space between. So now that space is going to be however much it needs to be. Lastly, for the top and bottom padding, let's say that we actually want it to be, let's say 64 pixels. Now we can get rid of that background color and let's apply a fill to this frame. So this is essentially how we structured our content auto layout component. So now that we have it essentially all built with all of the rectangles and just the groups, now we're going to build it for real. And this is what I'm going to show you once we start putting actual copy and content in there, what we can do. So first, let's get a heading. This is a super cool heading. Our heading is going to be 36 pixels. Beautiful. Next is going to be our body text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go to, also got a photo ready. I'm going to go to our trusty Lorem Ipsum IO. This is just the website I use to get all my Lorem Ipsum. I find it super handy and super useful because you can just load it up, click copy, just copy to your clipboard. Let's paste that in. Now it's made everything its natural width, which is 7,600 pixels wide. A bit much. So we're going to do the auto height. We're going to make this 500 pixels. That works. Instead of 36, we're going to do 16 and we're going to make it a regular font weight. Let's say 120% of the line height, maybe not 120, 150%. Cool. So let's put that over here. So if we go back to our kind of cheat sheet up here, if we look into it, we've got left column, we've got text content, we've got the heading and the body text. So that's within its own auto layout frame. So let's do that. Select these two elements, put this within an auto layout. We don't want it to be in the middle because it's left aligned text. So we're going to put that in the top left. And the spacing between it, let's make this 16. Let's call this text content. Now you can see that it's automatically layered the layer name as the text that's in it, which, look, it's sometimes useful, sometimes not. If you start changing up the text, it's sometimes a bit different. Sorry, not different, a bit difficult. But for me, I kind of prefer calling it heading and body text. Especially if you're going to reuse this component, then you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, that's what that is. That's what this is, rather than trying to connect the dots. So now we've got a text content. Let's put a button into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up. We're going to get our beautiful Inquire Today button. We're going to copy that. Going to put that down. Just going to put that down here. And then now, as we did with up here, this is all going to go within its own auto layout, and that's going to be called left column. So let's copy that. Select all. We're going to group it. So you can see here how it's got auto layout, it's got all mixed. That's because this top frame is its auto layout and this bottom frame is own auto layout. So it's trying to sync up the settings. So if we just group it and then enable auto layout, it'll put those two auto layout frames within its own auto layout. Let's rename the frame. And let's change the spacing from 85 to, let's say 48. Let's make it a bit bigger. Beautiful. So now that we've got that, now we want our image. So this, as you saw before, I had it from pixels, but I've overridden our clipboard. So let's go back. Let's get woman in brown. I don't know. Looks cool. Paste here. Here we go. And now we've got our image. So now we're going to put this all within its own auto layout frame. It's aligned to the middle. And then we wanted this. Why did we want this? We wanted this as 1024 with a 24 pixel padding. So we're going to change this fixed width to 1024 with a 24 pixel padding with a packed space between. Now, you can see that there's a couple of issues here. Things are overlapping and things are too wide for the frame. So there's two ways in which we can get around this. The first one is that we can either change the width of this frame or we could change the width of this frame as it's already fixed. So let's say want to make the image always 365 wide. So we know there's that space in there, or let's say 420. So we always know there's going to be that space in there. That's one way of getting around it. It's quite manual. Let's say we wanted this auto layout to always be 50-50. 50% of the width will be, of the dynamic width will be allowed for the text content. 50% will be allowed for the image. So what we can do is within the left column, instead of hug, we're going to make this fill. And you can see here that it's already kind of updated itself. Now we're going to do the same here, fill. So you can see those dotted lines that's about running at the eye of heading, that the allowed or the original parent frame is having 50% of the width, and so is the image. So the image is taking up 438.5. This is also taking up 438.5. To fix the content within it, if we double click, we go within the text content frame. So this is hugging the content. Change this to fill. So now the frame is, but now the content within that frame still isn't. So for body text, instead of fixed, as this is never going to change, as it's a fixed value, this we're going to change to fill container. And so the same with the heading. So now, even if we increase the width of the frame, everything will always be a 50-50% split, which is quite cool. Everything always aligned to the middle. Let's quickly rename this as well. Text image components. Instead of text images, call it text left, comma, image right component. Hypothetically, we want this image to be dynamically as tall as the content. So we always want, let's say, this top and bottom space to be 50 pixels. This image is really good because the focus is in the center of the image. So no matter what, really, as much as we get that much within it, it's pretty much fine. So similarly, how we made the width to fill, if we choose the image and we make the height fill container, you see that it just squashed it because we didn't put any top and bottom spacing within this auto layout. But now if you make this, what do we say, 56, then this top and bottom spacing will be 56 and the image will fill the rest of this available space. So if we grab this text content, so double it, the image height dynamically changes as well. If we get, this is a super cool heading that is super long and useful, not upper, super long. Again, the image height changed as well. One other thing we could do, let's say if we wanted a little bit of top padding on just the text so the image kind of goes a bit above and below it. Within our left column frame, if we give that a little bit of top and bottom spacing, again, the image is now kind of that little bit bigger, which is a bit more visually appealing than it having nothing. It's a bit too harsh. I don't know, for me at least, it looks a bit unbalanced, whereas that, it just looks a bit like it has a little bit of extra room, a little bit of extra breathing room. Lastly, fill backgrounds. And that's the thing, right? I mean, I showed you this at the start of the video, and for those of you that said it's a basic web component, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. It is a pretty fundamental web component that's essentially on what, 99% of websites, text and an image and with a button. But what we've created instead is a super advanced nested auto layout Figma component that is entirely dynamic to the needs of the content within it. And that's the real secret of auto layout. Something may seem really complicated, and you know what? Let's be honest, it might be. But if you entirely strip it back, think about it as rectangles, and then slowly build it up, you can create something super advanced, all completely dynamic. And let's be honest, this saves you heaps of time in the future. But look, that's pretty much everything from me. I mean, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to leave it in the comments down below. I will try to answer them as soon as possible. I do want to make more Figma kind of videos like this in the future as well. I'm kind of starting to think about one in terms of master components and variations and everything like that. As partnering that with auto layout. But yeah, thanks for watching. It's been me, Drew, and I'll see you next time. Did you just hear my arm crack? I got the car